They vanished diving. For 10 years, only silence. Then, a desperate message in a bottle unearths, a terrifying secret miles beneath the waves, forcing a mother to confront an impossible truth. The turquoise waters of the Vatu Aira passage, usually teeming with life and vibrant color, held a chilling stillness on that ill-fated afternoon in late October 2015. The dive boat, Coral Kiss, bobbed gently against its mooring, its deck eerily quiet. An hour had passed since James Walker, a seasoned professional diver with over 2 decades of experience, navigating the world's most challenging underwater terrains, had descended into the depths with his 12-year-old daughter, Mia. They were on a father-daughter expedition, a special trip Mia had been excitedly chattering about for months. James had promised her a glimpse of the famed soft coral gardens, a world of kaleidoscopic beauty hidden beneath the waves near Fiji. The boat captain, a local Fijian named Manu, chewed nervously on his lip, his gaze fixed on the spot where the diver's bubbles had last broken the surface. He'd seen countless divers come and go, but a knot of unease tightened in his chest. James was meticulous, a stickler for safety protocols. He'd estimated a 60-minute dive, maximum. Now, the digital dive timer clipped to the boat's console showed 1 hour and 27 minutes. Mia's brightly colored yellow and pink fins, a stark contrast to her father's professional black gear, lay neatly beside a half-eaten sandwich and her favorite dog-eared copy of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea on a passenger bench. A sudden breeze rustled the pages, the only sound besides the lapping of water against the hull. Manu's first call to the local maritime authorities was hesitant, tinged with the hope that he was overreacting. But as another 15 minutes bled into the vast expanse of the Pacific, his calls grew more urgent, his voice cracking. The initial search was a frantic, desperate scramble. Nearby dive operators and fishing vessels joined the Coral Kiss, their crews scanning the impossibly blue water, their shouts swallowed by the immensity of the ocean. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, cruel backdrop to the unfolding tragedy. There was no sign of James or Mia. No stray bubbles, no equipment floating to the surface, nothing but the endless, indifferent ocean. The official search operation spanned the next 10 days. Helicopters thudded overhead, their spotlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom and twilight. Search and rescue divers, flown in from Australia and New Zealand, meticulously combed the charted reef systems, pushing the limits of safe diving depths. They found nothing. The currents in the Vatu Aira passage were notoriously complex, capable of pulling objects, or bodies, miles away in unpredictable directions, or worse, dragging them down into the unexplored trenches that scarred the ocean floor nearby. After 10 agonizing days, with no leads and diminishing hope, James and Mia Walker were officially declared lost at sea, presumed victims of a tragic diving accident. 10 years later, in her quiet coastal home in California, Anna Walker lived in a world suspended between memory and a hope that defied logic. The year was 2025. The vibrant, bustling life she once shared with James and Mia had been replaced by a hollow echo. Their photographs adorned every mantelpiece, every wall. James, ruggedly handsome, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a perpetual smile. Mia, a miniature version of her father, all gangly limbs and a gap-toothed grin, her arm always slung around his neck. Anna moved through her days with a practiced calm, a facade for the storm that perpetually raged within her. She worked as a freelance illustrator, the flexible hours allowing her to retreat when the waves of grief threatened to pull her under. The official explanation, a sudden, unforeseen underwater hazard, perhaps a disorienting current, equipment malfunction, or even a medical emergency, had never truly settled in Anna's heart. James was too experienced, too cautious. He had taught Mia to respect the ocean, to understand its power and its perils. He wouldn't have taken unnecessary risks, not with his precious daughter. The sheer absence of any trace was what haunted her the most. No shredded wetsuit, no damaged tank, not even a single fin. It was as if the ocean had simply opened its mouth and swallowed them whole, leaving not a ripple behind. This evening, like countless others, Anna found herself in James's old study. The room was preserved, almost a shrine. His dive logs, meticulously detailed, filled a bookshelf. His underwater cameras, lenses, and specialized gear were neatly arranged. She ran her fingers over a large, framed chart of the Fijian archipelago, the Vatu Ira passage, circled in red ink. Her finger traced the complex bathymetric lines, the steep drop-offs into abyssal depths. Over the years, she had become an amateur oceanographer, devouring books on currents, marine geology, and unsolved maritime disappearances. She'd even contacted independent deep-sea salvage experts, only to be met with sympathetic but firm rejections. The area was too vast, the potential depths too extreme, the costs astronomical, especially with no specific target zone. A small, leather-bound notebook lay open on James's desk. It was one she hadn't looked at for several years. Unlike his official dive logs, this one seemed more personal, filled with sketches of marine life, notes on potential new dive sites, and occasional philosophical musings about the sea. Her fingers brushed against a page towards the end, a page she didn't remember. There, in James's familiar scrawl, was a heading, Project Chimera, Fiji Trench Anomaly. Below it were coordinates, significantly deeper and further out than the recreational dive site where they had supposedly been. There were cryptic notes, unusual magnetic signatures, harmonic pulses, and bioluminescent megafauna, or something else. A crudely drawn sketch depicted a strange, trench-like formation with an arrow pointing to an area marked possible entry point. Anna's breath hitched. James had never mentioned any Project Chimera. He had always shared his diving plans with her, especially the ambitious ones. This felt different, secretive. Could he have been planning a deeper, clandestine dive that day? A dive he knew was inherently dangerous and hadn't wanted to worry her about, perhaps taking Mia on the safer reef dive as a cover, intending to explore this anomaly later, or on a subsequent trip. Or worse, had he ventured there with Mia? The thought sent a fresh spear of icy dread through her. The official narrative of a simple, tragic accident suddenly felt thin, almost transparent. The questions, always simmering beneath the surface of her grief, now roared to life. What had James been looking into? And what, or who, might he have encountered in those uncharted depths? The vast, silent blue of the ocean on the chart seemed to mock her, holding its secrets tighter than ever. But now, there was a new, terrifying thread to pull. The decade following James and Mia's vanishing had sculpted Anna Walker into a woman of quiet resilience, a stoic lighthouse keeper tending to a flame of memory that refused to be extinguished. Outwardly, she was the picture of composed grief, the kind that society found acceptable after so many years. She attended community events, managed her freelance illustration deadlines, and even offered a gentle smile to well-meaning neighbors, who still occasionally offered their hushed condolences. But beneath the surface, the currents of her loss ran deep and treacherous. Sleep offered little respite, often populated by dreams of endless blue, of searching for faces that shimmered and dissolved just beyond her reach. The laughter of children in the park, a father holding his daughter's hand. These everyday sights were tiny, sharp barbs that snagged at her heart, constant reminders of the gaping void in her life. James had been more than a husband. He was her anchor, her partner in every adventure, big or small. His passion for the ocean was infectious. He wasn't a reckless thrill-seeker, but a devoted scholar of the deep, a man who found solace and wonder in its silent cathedrals. His reputation in the international diving community was stellar. He'd contributed to marine biology surveys, assisted in underwater archaeological expeditions, and even consulted on deep-sea rescue protocols. His dive logs were not just records, they were narratives, filled with precise observations, sketches, and an almost poetic appreciation for the marine world. He'd once told Anna, his eyes alight with a familiar fire, "The ocean doesn't keep secrets, Annie, it just has a very deep voice. You just have to learn how to listen." The irony of those words now felt like a cruel twist of fate. How could such a man, so attuned to the ocean's nuances, simply vanish without a whisper? And Mia, oh Mia, she had been the sunshine that pierced through any gloom, a vibrant spark of life. At 12, she possessed an intelligence and curiosity that belied her years. She'd inherited her father's love for the sea, devouring his books on marine creatures and pestering him with endless questions about underwater volcanoes and bioluminescent fish. Their bond was a beautiful, tightly woven tapestry of shared jokes, whispered secrets, and a mutual adoration for the aquatic realm. James had been cautious, almost to a fault, when it came to Mia's diving. He'd started her in shallow, controlled environments, meticulously checking her gear, drumming safety procedures into her until they were second nature. The thought of him willingly putting Mia in unmanageable danger was anathema to everything Anna knew about him. The Project Chimera notes, with their implication of a far more hazardous undertaking, felt like a betrayal of that deeply ingrained caution, unless the circumstances were far more complex than she could imagine. The loss was not just of two beloved individuals, but of a future. The family trips they'd planned, Mia's college graduations, the quiet comfort of growing old together, all stolen, replaced by an aching emptiness. The what-ifs were a relentless chorus in Anna's mind. What if she had insisted on joining them on that Fiji trip? What if James had chosen a different dive site? What if? In the initial years, Anna had been a whirlwind of frantic activity. She'd flown to Fiji multiple times, pleading with local authorities, hiring private investigators, and offering a substantial reward for any information. She'd spoken to every diver, every boat captain, every fisherman who might have seen something, anything. The responses were always the same: sympathetic headshakes, tales of the ocean's unforgiving nature, and a gentle steering back towards the official narrative of a tragic accident. The Fijian authorities, while initially helpful, had eventually closed the case. Their resources finite, their focus shifted to more immediate concerns. The Project Chimera notebook felt like the first tangible crack in that wall of accepted tragedy. The discovery of James's cryptic notes galvanized Anna in a way she hadn't felt in years. The dull ache of grief, which had become an almost comfortable companion, was now pierced by a sharp, focused urgency. The vague, shadowy antagonist she had sometimes imagined, a rogue wave, a sudden equipment failure, began to morph into something potentially more sinister, more deliberate, hinted at by James's references to unusual magnetic signatures and subharmonic pulses. These weren't terms associated with recreational diving accidents. They spoke of something else. Her days took on a new structure. Her illustration work, once a welcome distraction, now felt like an impediment. She began to meticulously cross-reference the coordinates from James's notebook with maritime charts, satellite imagery, and declassified oceanographic survey data she found online. The location he'd marked as possible entry point was indeed in the vicinity of the Fiji Trench, an area known for its extreme depths and complex geology. It was far from any established shipping lanes or known dive sites. Why would James be interested in such a remote and hazardous location? And what was the anomaly he was investigating? She recalled faint, fragmented conversations. James, in the months leading up to the Fiji trip, had been more preoccupied than usual, spending long hours in his study. Sometimes on hushed phone calls he'd end abruptly if she entered the room. At the time, she'd attributed it to the meticulous planning he always undertook before a major expedition. Now, those memories took on a more ominous hue. Had Project Chimera been a privately funded research endeavor, or something commissioned, something that required discretion? The term chimera itself was evocative, a mythical creature, a hybrid, something illusory or fabricated. Was James chasing a scientific marvel, or had he stumbled into something that others wanted to remain hidden? The financial strain of the past decade had been significant. The initial search efforts and private investigators had eaten into their savings. Anna had downsized their home once, and then again moving to the small coastal cottage she now occupied. She'd sold James's beloved research vessel, a painful decision, but necessary to stay afloat. Yet, she had never touched the trust fund they had set up for Mia's education. That remained sacrosanct, a monument to a future that never was, or perhaps a seed of hope for a miracle she barely dared to articulate. The notebook became her constant companion. She scanned its pages into her computer, enlarging the sketches, trying to decipher every word of James's sometimes hurried script. The subharmonic pulses particularly intrigued her. She remembered James once discussing how certain low-frequency sound waves could travel immense distances underwater, sometimes used in experimental communication technologies or for mapping subsurface structures. Could these pulses be artificial? And what about the bioluminescent megafauna, or something else? The question mark loomed large, a testament to James's own uncertainty. Anna's demeanor began to shift. The quiet resignation that had settled over her features was now interspersed with moments of intense concentration. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw set. Her friends, the few who remained close, noticed the change. There was a new spark in her eyes, a dangerous flicker that hadn't been there before. When one of them gently suggested that perhaps it was time to let James and Mia rest in peace, Anna had responded with a firmness that brooked no argument. "They are not at peace, and neither am I. Not until I know the truth." The ocean had taken her family. It was time to make the ocean speak. The question was, who else might be listening? Armed with James's notebook and a burgeoning sense of dread mixed with determination, Anna Walker's first instinct was to approach the authorities. Surely, this new information, these cryptic coordinates and unsettling notes about magnetic anomalies and subharmonic pulses, would warrant a reopening of the case, or at least a fresh look. 10 years had passed, technologies had advanced, and perhaps now, with a more specific area of interest, some answers could be found. She began with the United States Coast Guard, the agency that had liaised with the Fijian authorities during the initial search. Her appointment was with a Commander Davies, a man whose polite but weary expression suggested he'd dealt with countless grieving relatives clinging to improbable hopes. Anna laid out her story, her voice steady as she presented copies of James's notes, the enlarged charts, and her own painstakingly compiled research connecting Project Chimera to the remote Fiji Trench. She spoke of James's expertise, his meticulous nature, and her unwavering belief that he wouldn't have simply vanished due to carelessness. Commander Davies listened, nodding occasionally, his gaze drifting from Anna's earnest face to the documents spread across his polished desk. When she finished, there was a protracted silence, broken only by the hum of the office air conditioning. "Mrs. Walker," he began, his tone gentle but firm, "I understand this is incredibly difficult for you, and I commend your dedication." James Walker was a respected man in his field. He paused, steepling his fingers. "However, these notes, while intriguing, are speculative. Project Chimera could refer to anything, a theoretical exercise, a personal project he was merely considering. The coordinates point to an area of extreme depth, virtually inaccessible without highly specialized, military-grade submersibles. The resources required to even begin a preliminary survey of such a location are immense." Anna felt a familiar coldness creep into her heart. But the magnetic signatures, the pulses, doesn't that suggest something more? Something that might have interfered with his equipment, or drawn him there? "With all due respect, Mrs. Walker," Davies continued, a hint of officialdom now coloring his tone, "the ocean is full of unexplained phenomena. Magnetic variations are common, especially near trench systems. As for subharmonic pulses, that could be anything from distant seismic activity to biologics we don't yet fully understand. To launch an operation based on these fragments, 10 years after the fact, with no concrete evidence of foul play or a survivable situation, he left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, welled up. "So, you're saying you won't even look into it?" "We will, of course, file this information," Davies said, gesturing vaguely at her papers. "It will be added to the existing case file. But I must be frank with you, Mrs. Walker. The likelihood of this leading to any active measures is extremely low. The original investigation was thorough. The conclusion, while tragic, was that they were lost at sea in a diving accident." His eyes held a practiced sympathy that felt more like a dismissal. Anna left the Coast Guard office with a leaden weight in her chest. The system, which she had hoped might offer a path to answers, had presented its first impenetrable wall. Her next attempts yielded similar results. She contacted the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, thinking James's notes on unusual marine phenomena might pique their scientific curiosity. A polite but skeptical marine biologist listened via video call, suggesting the bioluminescent megafauna was likely a misinterpretation of known deep-sea creatures, and the other notes too vague to warrant diverting research vessels from scheduled projects. "Deep-sea exploration is costly, Mrs. Walker," the biologist explained, "and we must prioritize based on clear scientific objectives." Frustration gnawed at Anna. It felt as though the official narrative, set in stone a decade ago, was immutable. The accident was a neat, closed box, and no one wanted to reopen it. especially not based on the fragmented scribblings of a dead man presented by his grieving widow. The inherent assumption seemed to be that her grief was clouding her judgment, leading her down a rabbit hole of fantasy. She then tried to trace any official record or funding for a Project Chimera. She searched academic databases, government contract listings, and even approached private deep-sea exploration companies, the kind that undertook salvage operations or specialized research for wealthy clients. Most didn't even grant her an appointment. The few who did listened with a detached professional interest, their eyes lighting up briefly at the mention of potential new discoveries, only to dim when they realized she had no funding, only questions and a 10-year-old mystery. One salvage operator, a grizzled veteran named Henderson, bluntly told her, "Lady, if there was something valuable down there that someone powerful wanted, they'd have gotten it. If it's something dangerous they wanted hidden, then you poking around isn't going to be welcomed. Either way, without a treasure map or a government check, no one's going near the Fiji Trench on a hunch." His words, though harsh, resonated with a chilling logic. What if James hadn't been on a scientific quest, but had stumbled upon something someone didn't want found? The unusual magnetic signatures and sub-harmonic pulses suddenly took on a more sinister connotation. Could they be indicative of a hidden facility, a clandestine operation? The term antagonist, from her initial desperate imaginings, began to feel less like a faceless force of nature and more like a deliberate human agency. The indifference wasn't just official, it was societal too. She tried to share her findings with a journalist who had covered maritime mysteries, hoping for some media pressure. The journalist listened patiently but ultimately declined, citing the lack of new, verifiable evidence and the age of the story. "It's a tragedy, Mrs. Walker, a terrible one," he said, "but without something more concrete, it's just an old tragedy." The world, it seemed, had moved on. James and Mia were a faded headline, a footnote in the vast ledger of unsolved disappearances. Anna noticed a subtle but unsettling pattern. While most officials were dismissive, a couple of her inquiries to more obscure international maritime databases seemed to hit a dead end with unusual speed. Emails went unanswered, or she received vague, automated replies stating her queries could not be processed. Was it just bureaucratic inefficiency, or was information about that specific sector of the Fiji Trench being managed? She thought back to Manu, the captain of the Coral Kiss. He had been devastated, cooperative during the initial search. Anna hadn't spoken to him in years. Finding him wasn't easy. He'd moved on from the dive company. After several days of searching online and making calls to contacts in Fiji, she finally tracked down an email address for him. She wrote a careful message, explaining her new findings and asking if he remembered anything unusual in the days leading up to or on the day of James and Mia's disappearance. Anything James might have said, any unusual boats in the area, any strange radio interference. Days turned into a week, and Anna began to fear Manu wouldn't reply. Perhaps he too wanted to leave the painful memories undisturbed. Then, an email landed in her inbox. It was short, the English slightly broken. Manu remembered James being more quiet and intense than usual before that last dive. He'd seen James studying charts of areas far beyond the recreational reef. He also recalled something he hadn't thought significant at the time. A few days before the disappearance, he'd noticed a sleek, dark-hulled vessel with no visible name or flag lingering on the distant horizon in the general direction of the deeper waters James had been charting. It had vanished by the next morning. At the time, he'd dismissed it as a private yacht or perhaps a patrol boat. Now, coupled with Anna's information, it felt unsettling. Manu's email ended with a cautious line. "Be careful, Mrs. Walker. Some parts of the ocean are best left alone. Some people too." The veiled warning sent a shiver down Anna's spine. The wall of silence wasn't just passive indifference, it was beginning to feel actively maintained. The system wasn't just unresponsive, it was perhaps in some unseen way resistant. James's Project Chimera was not just a forgotten note, it was a secret, and someone, somewhere, might still be invested in keeping it that way. The immensity of the task ahead, of prying open a truth that seemed to be guarded by silence, and perhaps something more, settled upon her. She was no longer just a grieving widow, she was an investigator, and the stakes were rising with every unanswered question. Manu's email, with its cryptic warning, and the unsettling image of the nameless, dark-hulled vessel acted as a key, unlocking compartments of Anna's memory that had been sealed by the sheer trauma of her loss. The official narrative of a tragic accident had, for a decade, acted like a suffocating blanket over these recollections, rendering them insignificant. Now, with the Project Chimera notes providing a chilling new lens, these dormant memories began to stir, flickering to life like embers in a long-dead fire. Anna retreated further into James's study, the room becoming less a shrine and more an active investigation site. She surrounded herself with his belongings, not as mementos of grief, but as potential clues. She ran her fingers along the spines of his oceanography textbooks, pulled out charts he'd marked, and meticulously reread his personal journals, not just the Chimera notebook, but others dating back years, searching for any pattern, any precursor to this secret project. A particular memory began to surface, hazy at first, then sharpening with painful clarity. It was from about 6 months before the Fiji trip. James had attended an international oceanographic symposium in Geneva. He'd been excited about it, a chance to connect with peers and learn about the latest deep-sea exploration technologies. When he returned, however, his usual ebullience was subtly diminished, replaced by a preoccupied air. He'd been evasive about some of the sessions, unusually so. Anna remembered asking him if everything was all right. He'd forced a smile, kissed her forehead, and said, "Just some fascinating but highly theoretical stuff, Annie. Nothing that'll pay the mortgage, unfortunately." But his eyes hadn't quite met hers. Now, that evasiveness felt like a glaring red flag. Had Project Chimera been born from something he'd heard or someone he'd met at that symposium? She searched online for the symposium's agenda and attendee list from that year. The list was long, a global who's who of marine science. She scanned the names one by one, a tedious process. Most were academics or representatives from established research institutions. Then, one entry caught her eye. Dr. Aris Thorne, independent deep-sea research consultant, registered via Thalassocorp. The name Thorne didn't immediately ring a bell, but Thalassocorp pricked at her memory. James had mentioned it once, disparagingly, calling them treasure hunters masquerading as scientists, known for their aggressive, well-funded expeditions into controversial territories, often with little regard for environmental impact or international maritime law. Could James, a man of such staunch scientific ethics, have become entangled with someone from Thalassocorp? It seemed unlikely, yet the name lingered. She cross-referenced Dr. Aris Thorne with James's personal address book, an old-fashioned Rolodex he stubbornly refused to replace. Tucked away under T was a card, not for Aris Thorne, but simply Thorne, A.C. Gies, with a Swiss phone number. Her heart hammered against her ribs. James knew this person, or at least had their contact details. Another memory surfaced, triggered by the name. A late-night phone call James had taken in his study, his voice low and urgent. She'd only caught snippets. Cannot guarantee discretion on that frequency. And the payload is far too sensitive for conventional recovery. And a phrase that now made her blood run cold: the Fiji Trench offers the best natural shielding. At the time, she'd assumed it was related to some complex scientific equipment or a delicate marine specimen. Now, juxtaposed with Project Chimera and Thorne's contact, the words painted a far more dangerous picture: payload, shielding. These were not the words of a man planning a father-daughter reef dive. Anna recalled James's increasing frustration with the limitations of academic funding and bureaucratic red tape in the year before his disappearance. He had been working on a new type of deep-sea sensor array, one he believed could detect minute changes in geothermal vent activity, potentially predicting underwater eruptions. He'd poured his own money into the prototype, but securing grants for full-scale development and deployment had proven impossible. "They want incremental improvements, Annie," he'd fumed one evening, staring out at the ocean, not breakthroughs. "They're afraid of what we might find if we look too deep, too hard." Had this frustration driven him to seek unconventional, perhaps even compromised partners? Had Thorne or Thalassocorp offered him the resources he so desperately needed, but at a terrible price? The image of Mia, her bright yellow fins neatly placed on the coral kiss, flashed in Anna's mind. Why take Mia on any part of such a venture? It didn't make sense, unless Mia wasn't meant to go near Project Chimera, unless the recreational dive was just that, a genuine father-daughter outing, and James had planned to investigate the anomaly separately, perhaps later, or had been tragically diverted. Or the most chilling thought of all, perhaps the anomaly was closer to the recreational site than he'd let on, and something had gone catastrophically wrong, drawing them both in. She remembered James meticulously packing for Fiji. He'd packed his usual professional dive gear, but also a separate, heavy-duty Pelican case that he'd been very guarded about. He'd said it contained specialized camera equipment for observing soft coral fluorescence. It was plausible. He was always experimenting with new photographic techniques. But now, she wondered if that case had held something else entirely, something related to the Project Chimera coordinates and the unusual magnetic signatures. Was it a sensor, a beacon, or something designed to interact with whatever he expected to find? The subharmonic pulses note in his journal nagged at her. James had a colleague, a sound engineer named Dr. Ben Carter, who specialized in underwater acoustics. They'd collaborated on a project years ago, mapping whale migration patterns. Anna found Ben's number and called him. He was shocked to hear from her, his voice full of sympathy. After explaining her discovery of James's notes, she asked him about subharmonic pulses in the context of the Fiji Trench. Ben was silent for a moment. "That's unusual, Anna," he said slowly. "Natural subharmonics can occur, say from large-scale geological events, but they're typically very low frequency and diffuse. If James was noting specific, localized pulses, especially in conjunction with magnetic anomalies, that could suggest something artificial. Some experimental military sonar technologies play with subharmonics for deep penetration or stealth. Or, well, there are some pretty outlandish theories about non-terrestrial sources, but that's pure sci-fi. Could it be a communication system, Ben, or a cloaking technology for something hidden?" Anna pressed, her voice barely a whisper. "Theoretically, yes to both," Ben admitted. "Subharmonics can be incredibly difficult to detect with standard equipment, and they can carry a surprising amount of information or energy if modulated correctly. If someone wanted to operate a hidden underwater facility, using a combination of magnetic shielding and acoustic cloaking based on subharmonics, it's technically feasible, though incredibly advanced, way beyond anything publicly acknowledged." The pieces were clicking into place, forming a terrifying mosaic. James, frustrated with conventional science, possibly approached by the morally ambiguous Thalassocorp or an associate like Thorne, investigating a deep trench anomaly characterized by artificial magnetic and acoustic signatures. He was carrying specialized, undeclared equipment. A dark, unidentified vessel was seen in the vicinity. This wasn't an accident. This was a man walking into a hidden world, a world that clearly didn't want to be found. Anna remembered the exact day James received the final confirmation for the Fiji dive charter. He'd been on the phone, the call from an international number. He'd seemed relieved, but also tense. When he hung up, he'd stared at the chart of the Fiji Trench for a long time, his expression unreadable. He then turned to her, pulled her close, and said, "This Fiji trip, Annie, it's important. More important than you know." At the time, she thought he meant for his research, for his connection with Mia. Now, his words echoed with a far more profound and dangerous weight. He hadn't just been planning a dive, he'd been on a mission, and somewhere in the crushing darkness of the Fiji Trench, that mission had met a silent, formidable obstacle. The wall of silence she had encountered from official channels suddenly felt less like indifference and more like a carefully constructed barrier. The year 2025 was drawing to a close, a grey November day, mirroring the bleakness that had often settled in Anna Walker's heart. Her investigation, fueled by James's cryptic notebook and her own resurrected memories, had hit a series of frustrating dead ends. The wall of official silence remained formidable. The whispers of Project Chimera and the spectral presence of Thalassocorp were like phantom limbs. She felt their presence, but couldn't grasp them. Hope, which had flared so brightly, was beginning to dwindle into a familiar, weary ache. She was staring at the enlarged chart of the Fiji Trench, the red circle around James's coordinates seeming to mock her, when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar international number. Fiji. Her breath caught. It wasn't Manu. The voice on the other end was hesitant, accented. "Mrs. Anna Walker, my name is Semi Navuso. I am a fisherman from near Vanua Levu." Anna gripped the phone, her knuckles white. Yes? What is it? It is... I am not sure. Maybe it is nothing. Maybe it is... A cruel joke, Semi stammered, his discomfort palpable even across the crackling line. But I found something. My nets, they brought it up, tangled with the seaweed and the rubbish that the ocean gives back. Found what, Mr. Navuso? Anna urged, her heart beginning a frantic tattoo against her ribs. A bottle, madam. An old one. Very thick glass. Green, like the old rum bottles, sealed with wax. Inside, there is paper. Anna sank into her chair. A message in a bottle. It was the stuff of seafaring legends, of desperate castaways. Could it be? After 10 long years? What did the paper say, Mr. Navuso? Please. The writing is faded. Hard to read. Salt water has seeped in a little, but there are numbers. Coordinates, I think. And a message. A plea. He paused, and Anna could hear the rustle of paper. It says, SOS. James and Mia Walker. Alive. Held captive. Deep underwater facility. Coordinates approx. And then there are numbers. Latitude 16 degrees, 48 minutes, south. Longitude 178 degrees, 52 minutes west. It also says, they call themselves Guardians of the Deep. Tell Anna, I never stopped believing. Chimera is real. Anna let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. The world tilted, the room blurring around her. James. Mia. Alive. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath, then igniting a ferocious, impossible hope that surged through every nerve ending. Guardians of the Deep. Chimera is real. The coordinates. She scrambled for James's notebook, her hands trembling so violently she could barely turn the pages. The coordinates from the bottle were not identical to those James had noted for Project Chimera's possible entry point, but they were terrifyingly close, within a few nautical miles, pinpointing a specific location within that broader anomalous zone. It was a refinement, a precise targeting beacon sent from the abyss. Mr. Navuso, she choked out, tears streaming down her face. Can you send me a picture of it? Of the bottle, the paper, everything? Yes, madam. I have a smartphone. My son, he showed me. I will send. The paper is very fragile. I was afraid to handle it too much. Semi's voice was now laced with a worried awe. My wife, she said, it must be a sign from the ancestors. To find something like this, after so long. The images arrived minutes later, grainy but clear enough. The bottle was indeed old, encrusted with tiny barnacles, its surface scoured by sand and sea. The paper, yellowed and water-stained, bore James's unmistakable handwriting, slightly distorted by the conditions and the desperate circumstances, but undeniably his. There was even a tiny childlike drawing of a stick-figure girl waving, next to what looked like a crude representation of a submersible, Mia. A fresh wave of emotion washed over Anna, so powerful it nearly buckled her. Mia had been alive, conscious, able to contribute to this desperate message. The implications were staggering. For 10 years, James and Mia had not been lost to the unforgiving ocean, but held captive in some hidden, technologically advanced underwater facility operated by a shadowy organization calling themselves the Guardians of the Deep, an organization apparently connected to, or the very subject of, Project Chimera. They had managed, against unimaginable odds, to dispatch this fragile message, a tiny vessel of hope launched into the vastness of the Pacific, trusting in the currents and a benevolent fate to carry it to someone, anyone, who might understand. And it had found its way. The initial euphoria was quickly tempered by a chilling fear. If James and Mia were alive, what had their lives been like for the past decade? What were the Guardians of the Deep capable of? And now that this message had surfaced, what would happen if these Guardians realized their secret was compromised? Manu's warning about people best left alone echoed in her ears with new, terrifying resonance. Anna knew she couldn't go back to Commander Davies or any of the official channels that had dismissed her before. They would likely view this as even more outlandish. A grief-stricken fantasy or, worse, a hoax. Henderson, the cynical salvage operator, had been right. If someone powerful wanted something hidden, they would go to great lengths to keep it that way. She was on her own, But now she had something she hadn't possessed before. Proof. Tangible, verifiable proof. And coordinates. Her mind raced. She needed to get to Fiji. She needed to speak to Semi Navuso in person, to see the bottle, the message, with her own eyes. She needed to find someone, anyone, with the capability and the courage to venture to those coordinates. Thalassacorp, despite James's apparent misgivings and the elusive Dr. Aris Thorne, flashed in her mind again. Could they be approached? Would they be an enemy or a potential, albeit dangerous, ally if their Project Chimera had been subverted, or if they had an interest in what the Guardians were protecting or hiding? It was a perilous thought. The message contained one more fragment, almost illegible at the bottom, smudged by a water stain. Anna zoomed in on the photo, her screen pixelating. It looked like two words: deception everywhere. Deception everywhere. James was warning her. These Guardians were not what they might seem. The name itself, Guardians of the Deep, sounded almost benevolent, protective. But holding two people captive for a decade was not guardianship. It was imprisonment. What were they guarding? From whom? And why were James and Mia, a diver and his young daughter, so crucial to their operations or their secrecy? The past 10 years of uncertainty had been a unique form of torture. This new reality, that they were alive but captive, was a different kind, a terrifying urgency that demanded action. The photograph of Mia's stick figure drawing, a small, defiant wave from the depths, solidified Anna's resolve. She would not let this miraculous, impossible message be in vain. She had to find them. The twist wasn't just that they were alive. It was that their disappearance was no accident, no mystery of the sea, but a deliberate act of abduction by an unknown entity with capabilities far beyond what she could have imagined. The game had changed, and the stakes were now impossibly high. The shocking truth her mother's instinct had clung to for a decade was no longer a desperate hope, but a terrifying, actionable reality. The flight to Fiji was a blur of recycled air and frantic, whispered plans into a burner phone Anna had purchased specifically for this new, perilous chapter of her life. The grainy image of James's handwriting, Mia's tiny, hopeful wave, burned behind her eyelids. Semi Navuso met her at a pre-arranged, dusty cafe in a small village near Savu-Savu, his face a mixture of awe, fear, and profound sympathy. He was a man weathered by the sun and sea, his eyes holding the ancient wisdom of those who live in intimate concert with the ocean. He presented the bottle with a reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. It was undeniably real. The thick, greenish glass, the carefully sealed wax stopper now crumbling at the edges, the fragile, salt-stained paper. It was James's desperate, brilliant gamble against oblivion. Holding the actual note, feeling the delicate fibers of the paper that her husband's and daughter's hands had touched, Anna felt a surge of strength that bordered on ferocity. Semi, his voice hushed, recounted the exact location where his nets had snagged the bottle, a place where currents from the deeper trench system sometimes eddied and deposited debris. He also spoke of local legends, usually dismissed as fishermen's tales, of strange lights seen rising from the depths in that remote sector, of fishing lines inexplicably cut, and of a taboo forbidden zone that wise old mariners avoided. Anna knew that approaching any official body, even in Fiji, with this incredible story and a 10-year-old message in a bottle, would likely lead to her being sedated and kindly escorted to a psychiatric facility. The deception everywhere warning from James's note was a constant, chilling reminder. She needed an unconventional solution, a team that operated outside the rigid lines of bureaucracy and international law, yet possessed the sophisticated deep-sea technology to reach the specified coordinates, nearly 6,000 meters down. Her mind kept returning to Dr. Aris Thorne and Thalassacorp. James had distrusted them, yet they were one of the few private entities with the kind of submersible capabilities required. It was a desperate, dangerous gamble. She remembered James's cryptic note about Thorne's Swiss contact. Using encrypted channels and skills she'd acquired during her years of obsessive research into maritime disappearances, Anna managed to trace a current, albeit heavily guarded, communication line for Thorne. She didn't reveal the full extent of the message, only that she had new, verifiable information from James Walker himself regarding Project Chimera and an active, unauthorized deep-sea installation at specific coordinates near the Fiji Trench, an installation that might pose a threat or offer an unprecedented discovery. She hinted that James had been on the verge of a breakthrough Thalassocorp would find compelling. To her surprise, Thorne responded. He was cautious, his voice a cultured, unplaceable European accent over the secure line. He agreed to a clandestine meeting in a neutral location, a private yacht anchored in a discreet cove in the Osawa Islands. Anna knew she was walking into a potential trap, but she had no other cards to play. She brought the bottle, the note, and copies of James's Chimera research. Thorne was not what she expected. He wasn't the overtly villainous corporate raider she'd imagined. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with an academic air and weary, intelligent eyes. He listened intently as Anna presented her evidence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back, the faintest of smiles playing on his lips. "Project Chimera," he said softly. So, James Walker did find it. Or rather, they found him. Thorne then revealed a startling truth. Project Chimera wasn't originally James's project, nor Thalassocorp's in its entirety. It was a highly classified, multinational research initiative from decades prior, aimed at studying a unique, self-sustaining deep-sea ecosystem powered by geothermal vents and exhibiting bizarre biological and electromagnetic properties. Thorne had been a young scientist on the original project. The Guardians of the Deep, he explained, were a radical splinter group of the original Chimera scientists who, horrified by the potential military or corporate exploitation of their discoveries, had seized control of the primary research habitat, Sanctuary, cut off all communication, and effectively vanished, becoming a myth. They believed themselves to be protectors of this unique environment and its secrets, even if it meant isolating themselves and, apparently, anyone who stumbled upon them. James, with his advanced sensor technology and drawn by the unusual signatures, had inadvertently found Sanctuary's hidden entrance. They wouldn't have wanted to kill him, Mrs. Walker, Thorne mused, his eyes on the coordinates from the bottle. Not initially. He was a valuable mind. His daughter, a complication, but also leverage. They are zealots, brilliant but dangerously paranoid. They believe the surface world would only destroy what they protect. He then revealed that Thalassocorp had long suspected the continued existence of Sanctuary and had been covertly searching for it, not for purely scientific reasons, but for the immensely valuable extremophile organisms and potential energy sources it contained. James's message and the precise coordinates were the key Thorne had been missing. A cold deal was struck. Thorne would provide the submersible and a retrieval team, heavily armed, Anna noted with a knot of fear, to reach Sanctuary. His objective was to secure Sanctuary's data and any valuable biological samples. Anna's sole objective was James and Mia. Thorne made it clear that if things went sideways, he would prioritize his mission. The deception James warned of was layered, the Guardians' noble self-perception masking their ruthlessness, and Thorne's veneer of assistance masking his corporate greed. The descent into the Fiji Trench was a journey into an alien world. Anna, strapped into the cramped, dimly lit submersible alongside Thorne and his grim-faced team, watched the pressure gauges climb to terrifying levels. The coordinates from the bottle led them to a camouflaged entrance in a sheer underwater cliff face, masked by sophisticated electromagnetic and acoustic baffling, James's unusual signatures. Inside Sanctuary, it was not the dark, crude prison Anna had imagined. It was a network of interconnected geodesic domes, bathed in the soft glow of bioluminescent flora cultivated from the trench, a marvel of illicit engineering. But it was still a cage. The Guardians, a small group of aging, intense-eyed scientists, were shocked by their arrival, their defenses clearly not anticipating such a direct, technologically advanced intrusion. There was no firefight, as Thorne's team was overwhelmingly superior. The Guardians, confronted and outmaneuvered, offered little physical resistance, their fight seemingly extinguished with the breaching of their sanctuary. Amidst the controlled chaos, Anna saw them. James, older, gaunt, his hair streaked with grey, but his eyes, when they found hers, blazed with an intensity that defied his 10 years of captivity. And beside him, no longer a 12-year-old girl but a young woman of 22, was Mia. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but she stood tall, a defiant spark mirroring her father's Mia. The reunion was a maelstrom of emotions that transcended words. Tears, choked gasps, the desperate clinging of hands. Mia, it turned out, had become a student of the Guardians, learning their unique science, her sharp mind absorbing the wonders and dangers of Sanctuary. James had spent the decade in a silent battle of wills, protecting Mia, searching for a way to send a message, never giving up hope, even as he was forced to contribute his expertise to the Guardians' research to ensure their survival and fair treatment. The bottle had been Mia's idea, a desperate, almost childlike act of faith that her mother would somehow find it. Thorne's team efficiently plundered data cores and biological samples. The Guardians were to be taken to the surface, their fate uncertain, though Thorne spoke of debriefings and containment. As their submersible ascended, leaving Sanctuary and its strange, isolated world behind, Anna held James and Mia close. The truth had been more shocking, more complex than she could have ever imagined. Project Chimera was real, a hidden world beneath the waves, and the Guardians were its self-appointed, fallen angels. The world they resurfaced to was one that would struggle to comprehend their story. Thorne, true to his word in his own way, spun a carefully redacted tale of a daring rescue from a rogue scientific outpost, taking credit for the discovery and ensuring Thalassocorp's control over the narrative and the future of Sanctuary. He conveniently omitted the decade of captivity, portraying it as a shorter, more recent predicament. For Anna, James, and Mia, the fight for their full truth and for accountability was just beginning. But as they stood on the deck of Thorne's yacht, the Fijian sun warm on their faces, they were together. The ocean had kept its secret, but a mother's relentless love, a father's unwavering hope, and a daughter's brave message had finally brought them home. The deep, dark blue still held countless mysteries, and the deception everywhere warning would forever echo in their minds. But one family, at least, had found its way back to the light. The ending was not simple. The Guardians were a complex mix of idealism and fanaticism, and Thalassocorp's motives were far from pure. But for Anna, the most important truth had been unveiled. They were alive, and they were free.